You're walking across uneven ground. Your foot catches a root. For half a second, your body is airborne, and then it isn't. That single misstep 40,000 years ago was usually a death sentence. A broken femur meant you couldn't run, couldn't hunt, couldn't outpace a predator or keep up with a moving group. Modern trauma surgeons will tell you an untreated compound fracture, without antibiotics, without sterile tools, kills through infection in a matter of weeks. By most models of survival of the fittest, a Paleolithic human with a shattered leg should have been abandoned or eaten. And yet, in 1957, an American archaeologist named Ralph Selecki was excavating a cave in northern Iraq called Shanidar. He uncovered a Neanderthal skeleton, now known as Shanidar I, dated to roughly 45,000 years ago. The man was around 40 to 50 years old at death, elderly by Paleolithic standards. His right arm had been amputated above the elbow, his skull showed a healed fracture, his leg bones showed signs of a withering, degenerative injury that would have left him with a pronounced limp for years. He hadn't just survived one trauma, he'd survived several and lived with the damage for what researchers estimate was another decade or more. This changes something fundamental about how we picture the deep past. We tend to imagine early humans as disposable, fast, brutal, Darwinian, every injury a death sentence. But the bones say otherwise. They say someone fed him when he couldn't hunt. Someone helped him walk when his leg gave out. Someone kept him alive long after his body stopped being useful in any purely evolutionary sense. Shanidar I wasn't an isolated case. In the 1980s, a paleoanthropologist named Eric Trinkaus went back through the Neanderthal fossil record with a specific question: how many of these individuals showed evidence of healed, serious trauma? The number was staggering. Nearly 80 to 90% of adult Neanderthal skeletons examined showed at least one healed major injury: a crushed rib cage, a fractured skull, a shattered pelvis. Not just breaks, healed breaks. Bone that had knitted back together, meaning the person lived weeks, months, sometimes years past the initial trauma. And for an animal with no casts, no antiseptic, no anesthesia, that recovery rate is almost impossible to explain through luck alone. But here's where it gets stranger. In 1997, a paleopathologist named Charlotte Roberts began cataloging something specific in these ancient skeletons, not just that bones healed, but how they healed. Alignment, splinting patterns. Evidence that limbs had been immobilized, not left to fuse however gravity dictated. A femur, broken and left untreated, typically heals shortened and badly angled. The leg twists inward, the muscle overlaps the fracture site, and the result is often a bone shortened by 2 to 4 centimeters, sometimes more. But at Shanidar and at other Neanderthal sites across Europe, researchers kept finding something else. Bones that had healed straight, aligned, set, that takes intervention. It takes someone recognizing that a limb needed to be held still, packed, and protected for weeks, sometimes months, while another person hunted, gathered, and carried water for both of them. There's a case from La Chapelle-aux-Saints in southwestern France, discovered in 1908. The skeleton, an elderly Neanderthal male, shows advanced arthritis, tooth loss so severe he likely couldn't chew tough meat, and a spine that had begun to curve and degrade. Estimates place his age at death around 40 ancient, by the standards of a species with an average lifespan closer to 30. For years before he died, he would have been, by any practical measure, a liability to his group. He was fed anyway. Someone softened his food, or chewed it for him. Someone tolerated his slower pace on the move. That's not the whole story though, because survival like this isn't unique to Neanderthals, it goes back further, and it shows up in a place that upends the timeline almost entirely. In 2018, a team led by archaeologist Tim Maloney was digging in a limestone cave called Liang Tibo on the island of Borneo. They uncovered a skeleton dated to roughly 31,000 years ago. The individual's left lower leg had been surgically amputated, not from an accident, not from an animal attack, but from what the bone evidence suggested was a deliberate procedure. The stump showed clean healing, no signs of infection, no jagged trauma fracture. Someone had removed the limb intentionally, and the wound had been treated well enough that the person lived for years afterward, walking, it seems, on one leg in dense tropical terrain, 20,000 years before the invention of a written word anywhere on Earth. That single skeleton pushed the earliest known evidence of surgery back by tens of thousands of years. Except there was a problem with how researchers had been interpreting all of this. For decades, the assumption was that this kind of care, feeding the injured, setting bones, amputating diseased limbs, must have been rare. Exceptional, the work of one unusually devoted mate, or a small family unit protecting its own. An outlier, not a pattern. But by the time Eric Trinkaus's data was combined with newer finds Shanidar in Iraq, La La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, Liang Tebo in Borneo, and dozens of smaller sites across 3 continents, the picture stopped looking exceptional. It started looking systemic. These weren't isolated acts of individual kindness. They were a survival strategy, embedded in how these groups operated, spanning at least 2 human species across a span of more than 40,000 years. A 2012 study by archaeologist Penny Spikins went further, arguing that this capacity for sustained caregiving, not tool use, not fire, not even language, may have been one of the decisive factors separating surviving hominin lineages from the ones that vanished. Groups that tolerated an injured, slower, less productive member, that carried the cost of feeding someone who couldn't currently contribute, that remembered an obligation over weeks and months instead of abandoning it at the first sign of inconvenience, those groups persisted. The math shouldn't have worked. Evolutionarily, carrying dead weight is expensive. And yet, again and again, the bones show it happened anyway. There's a term some anthropologists use for this. The broken femur is civilization. Not the wheel, not agriculture, not riding a healed leg. Because a healed femur means someone was too injured to run, to hunt, to flee for long enough that natural selection alone should have ended them, and instead, another person carried water to them every day until they didn't need to anymore. You've probably never thought about your own body this way, but every time you've been sick, or injured, or simply had a bad week and someone brought you food, without being asked, you were participating in something that predates spoken language. Something that predates Homo sapiens itself. The oldest tool humans ever built wasn't made of stone.